I think now we're more focused on not so much having the continued conversations, which is important, of course, but it's more outcome focused now, and so we're getting really down to the mechanics of it, and certainly I think the key area in terms of the next steps is quite critical. I think is that it's how we sort of capture those outcomes and deliverables as well.
So with the strategy set from baseline data, the next piece that had to be built was to build a measurement system that allowed the community to track progress in data sets, but also in their own experiences of what are things getting better for people in Bourke. Also to track outcomes being improved for children and young people and their families, but also what areas are we starting to see the system change. So that was a significant piece of work. It involved developing theories of change, developing a large indicator bank, and producing a number of very usable formats for data. So there's a data dashboard, there's a community report card, and there are case studies that are communicated out to the community regularly around progress and reasons to be hopeful. So while a lot of that shared measurement work was technical and the leaders in Bourke needed support from people outside the community, they retained ownership of the direction, because Safe, Smart, Strong was set by the Tribal Council, and all of the things that were built around the data dashboard, the community report card, went to them for a sign-off and approval before going out to the community.
In terms of testing and trialling and reviewing how we're tracking and modifying has been probably a real strength of how we've achieved some of the success that we've achieved to this point.
It became clear that there were things that were happening on the ground or even outside of Bourke that we needed a stronger level of authorisation, whether it was in getting the data out of government or some of the work that the working groups in Bourke were trying to do. We were hitting some blockages. So we approached the then Attorney General, Brad Hazzard, and we asked him to become a ministerial cross-sector champion for the project. And he agreed, and we then asked him, could he convene a cross-sector leadership group which would bring together senior enough people across government and other agencies that could authorise and facilitate the work that was happening in Bourke, in and around Bourke.
The effect of the ministerial champion is, I think, significant. You do need someone high up in the political sphere to influence what's going on, and I think that the champ that Maranguka has been, he's highly articulate. He absolutely is committed to Maranguka, and he's been prepared to lobby and to push to get the outcomes for them. So I think it's been profound.
The cross-sector leadership group was established to continue and to drive, and were tasked almost by Minister Hazzard as the New South Wales government champion of Maranguka. So where Minister Hazzard at that stage had one or two annual forums of bringing people together, it was evident that that was great, but unless there was a much stronger commitment from regional leadership, that the level of investment and the level of support from state government wasn't there to actually drive effective change. And part of the picture has always been around addressing system change that's needed to realign what's needed to be tweaked to realign the system to actually better support the aims and aspirations of the community, and what's needed and address community identified priorities.
The role of the cross-sector leadership group is really to pull together the agencies that are responsible for delivering services on the ground and at that higher level, to actually work with the Maranguka Justice Reinvestment model to deliver on the Safe, Smart, Strong strategy that has been designed, organised by the community. So we pull those agencies together, and we really see where it is that the blockages are, Where it is that the opportunities for government to leverage off community, to leverage off the leadership of that community, and then to work in partnership with that. On that group are agencies such as health, family and community services, education, but we also have Alistair Ferguson, the Executive Director of Maranguka Justice Reinvest. We have Sarah Hopkins on that group. We also have the council and the philanthropists. We can't forget about those guys. And to really then work together to deliver on the ground what the Maranguka model is.
So one of the areas I have personally seen the most change in is around that cross-sector leadership. It started out as a group of people who were coming together almost against their will and sitting around and really trying to get them across the line on anything that we were bringing to the table. Over the years, that has really developed into something where every single person at that table has ownership, and every single person is very enthusiastic about driving the community agenda.
So usually if we have a blockage in the system, so for example, we've had issues where access to the Crown lands and things like that haven't been able to be resolved. Those issues will come up to the cross-sector leadership group, which is the most senior bureaucrats in that region that can actually then make some decisions and start making choices on resource allocation or blockages. They can get on the phone and have a conversation with someone in those departments where there's an issue, and usually quite often it's a policy issue or an issue around a process or something like that, and that group's able to then broker a solution.
So some examples of benefits that have come out of that cross-sector leadership and the authorisation that's come out of that group are things like ongoing data provision in Burke. So for instance, we now have regular catch-ups with a senior regional health representative who will not only respond to the data requests from community, but will come in with ideas on what might actually support the Safe, Smart, Strong agenda.
And have invited corporate Australia and the philanthropic sector in, which is key ingredients. And I think certainly, and it's been a learning sort of exercise for everyone.
But the other part that was so promising about this and that was so attractive was the quality of the partnerships involved in enabling that community vision. So that was, the Aboriginal Legal Service and Just Reinvest, corporate partners that brought in expertise like Lend-Lease, Gilbert and Tobin. And then there was the essential role that government play. So you already had, a number of different government departments at the table who were really open and willing to experiment with this together with Maranguka. So right from the beginning, there was a really important, strong partnership model. And then with that collective impact framework that really brought all of those different stakeholders together and gave them that framework of how to collaborate together.
I think the thing that I've really admired about the Maranguka sort of program or entity is the fact that they have drawn in the corporate and philanthropics. The fact that it's not just, is it government or is it community? In fact, it's a much more dynamic space. And so it's broadened the conversation. It's brought more, stakeholders into the conversation and the debate around what's best for Burke. And Burke hasn't sort of seen itself as a, dependent on others to fix its problems. It's actually taken some initiative and responsibility and said, our problems are ours, and we need help, but we will be the drivers of that. And that's an enormously powerful thing. And I think government can learn a lot by that. And certainly, the experience of Maranguka is making us think about how we draw in others to actually resolve bigger problems that government, has really been challenged with. So I think Maranguka is a fantastic sort of a test case, but really the thin edge of the wedge, I think, in terms of how we'll go forward in this space.
Corporate Australia needs to step up in this regard because we have an ability to influence through our sphere of influence, not only with employees that we have, but how corporates work in the community and the impact we can have in changing stereotypes and views and changing the way that people work. So we can do that better than government can because we're long-term organisations, we're there for a long haul. We're also living and operating in those communities, and we absolutely have a moral obligation to be working with the community on what's best for that community. So if in the absence of leadership by government or others, and in an environment at the moment where shareholders expect corporations to be working with community and to be working on climate change and to be good citizens and to be doing a whole range of things, we have an absolute obligation to walk hand in hand with community in this, because it's not only the right thing to do for the community, and as we've seen through Maranguka, the great outcomes on individual lives, but we're saving money, we're saving taxpayers' money. We're opening up new resources for corporate people to use, people resources. So if we can give people a good education, keep them out of jail, make them healthy, they're great employees for corporates to be taking up.
And so we would play that go-between role of explaining what the work was about, but also helping Maranguka navigate how do philanthropic foundations work and what do they need in terms of processing through their boards and all of their different governance processes. What we developed was that there would be a common agreement that we could all use to sign on to partner with Maranguka. We have shared reporting frameworks so that we don't then overburden the community efforts by having to report to a number of different foundations in a number of different ways in different timeframes. And that's been working exceptionally well.
Any effective place-based approach at its heart must be community-led, and it must be listening and walking alongside a community, linking where you can, working at the pace of the community. Sometimes that's very slow, sometimes it goes really quickly. You sort of have to align your pace to what's happening. And I think the particular example I mentioned before around being open to opportunity, understanding for people in government, I think, to really understand the amount of resources you have and the amount of linkages you can broker that make such a massive difference into communities. And that's the stuff that builds and grows momentum.
The leadership that has been able to be the leadership and government allowing that space for leadership to occur. The walking beside and with community is one thing that's sitting at the core of this on a values level, but then an ability to be able to manoeuvre policy and programs that sit around that is one thing that just gives hope. Absolutely gives hope that it's not about a broad policy, that has no flexibility to it, or a broad program that just has to be implemented. Being able to do generational change with senior leadership in the community, with the structure that Maranguka has now put in place, with all the working groups, tribal council, all of these mechanisms to be able to make decisions for the next generations and generations to come, is something that for government we can be a part of, that actually can prove to us how the investment and the impact of what we do now can support the grandchildren in the future.
That this is about a community trying to do something different. This is about a community willing to basically, in the words of the great Gary Barnes, have a crack. And they're having a crack, and you've got to back them in. And it's changing all the ways that you work and having those conversations. And I think that's one of the key things. The essence to power sharing is that, it's not all one way. It can't all be community and it can't all be government. It has to be a real collaborative approach and a real understanding that we all come from different positions and different places. And that if we do that, if we understand that and understand that dynamic, and then come with trust and openness, we can then do amazing things.